Let's welcome in our panel now. Allison Forsyth, Olympian and former alpine skier. Cynthia, Appiah, Olympian and current bobsledder.
Jamie Strashin, a CBC Sports journalist who's been covering this story for 4 years. And we welcome from Ottawa the CEO of Own the Podium, Ann Merklinger. And Own the Podium is the organization which is tasked with funding Canadian sport and making recommendations with a view to Canadian athletes winning medals at the Olympics and the Paralympics.
Allison, you've been very open about your story and sharing it, suffering sexual abuse at the hands of a former coach. You've called yourself a survivor of egregious sexual abuse within the Canadian sports system. Where did that system break down for you?
The system broke down for me from the very beginning. The reality of coming through sport at the time I did, and now as many athletes are, is we were not provided any training and education around grooming, the stages of any, indication of what could be possible. We had very lax travel policies. A lot was just, let's go, let's play sport, let's do skiing, and just send them on the road with the coach. And I think, it doesn't take too long to figure out what happened in my case. And I obviously, for good reason, won't go into detail around it specifically. But really, the system completely let me down and many other survivors over the years with the cover-up. I mean, my abuse was overtly covered up to my face. And I was very, very strongly coerced into silence for threats of losing sponsorship and losing my career. Even my mom was told that if she continued to call and ask what was happening, that she would, I wouldn't have a career. So I ski raced for 15 years after that in a place of trauma, a place of anger, coping strategies, post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm very open about all of this. And so it's interesting when we start to think about what we see athletes do in the finish line. You'll see many, videos of me with my hands in the air smiling. And it's just very important to note that it's far more important to understand what's going on the inside. And I skied out of fear, anger, and hatred, and self-blame and self-shame. So the system definitely needs to shift. I think we all know that now. I will say I and many other survivors saw this coming 4 or 5 years ago when I started in this advocacy work after coming out after my abuse case. And I just want to note that, we can look at Canada and we can think how horrible it is. But what is of interest, and I'm not taking away from what we're all seeing, is that Canada is actually tackling an issue that many countries haven't started. And I know that because I work with many international organizations that are just starting in this work. So I knew it would get a whole lot worse before I got better. It got better because I applaud everyone now coming forward, stepping into the light of this was not okay what happened to me. This is not okay what my coach has done to me or another athlete has done to me, to be frank. So abuse goes up, down, and sideways. And I think that we have to, in a way, sort of be celebratory of we're in the work. And I know that's hard to understand for a lot of people. It can be quite confrontational. But we are in the work to make the change happen, of which many countries haven't even started.
Cynthia, we're talking about a culture of abuse. You're one of 70 past and present Bobsleigh Canada skeleton athletes who demanded change in your organization. And you talked about a toxic culture of abuse that exists in the organization. What did you mean by that?
The toxicity that existed within Bobsleigh Canada Skeleton had so many examples that I don't even know if I have the time to really delve into each one of them. But just off the top, we had athletes having to compete while injured, either a physical injury or a concussion, hamstrings, for fear of losing their spot on a team or losing a spot on the Olympic team especially. You have a unfair and almost biased selection criteria at times where athletes are given more leeway to make concessions, or concessions are provided for certain athletes that aren't provided for others. And the lack of transparency in terms of why decisions are made, and when you ask questions, you're almost like discouraged from asking questions. So that's just the surface level of the issues that we were dealing with in Bobsleigh Skeleton before we came out through social media to really address some of the major issues that were going on within the sliding sports. On the other side of it, and I'm gonna jump off of what Allison is saying, we are having this conversation now and we're leading that charge because we've decided to tackle the issues head on. And we're starting to see that slow change to that positive side of things that we want to see within Bobsleigh Canada Skeleton. The new president that we have and the new CEO that we have are very much athlete-focused and athlete-centered, which is something that I don't think a lot of people really thought was a possibility. My hope is that Bobsleigh Canada Skeleton can be one of those NSOs that really pushes that envelope to show that it is possible to have high-performance sport in the context of keeping athletes safe, athletes at the center of the conversation, but also not forgetting that the ecosystem of sport requires everyone around it to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of athletes, the two of you here, many of them, Anne, as you know, in various sports as well, are speaking out, and there seems to be a reckoning. It's all happening right now at the same time. Why do you think this is all coming out now, Anne?
Well, I think the sharing of the horrific experience that Allison and her teammates had in alpine skiing in the 1990s has really paved the way for other athletes to feel safe to come forward. And many have. It's a much safer environment for them to be able to come forward now and speak out. And that hasn't always been the case. I think also that behaviors that were acceptable 5, 10, 15 years ago are not tolerated today. And that's a very good thing. One safe sport issue is one too many. I think we all have a responsibility to protect the health and physical and psychological safety of athletes and everyone involved in high performance sport. Our focus right now has been at the national level. We've had some provincial bodies and provincial governments focus on this as well. We still have a great deal of work to be done, but as Cynthia said, change is happening, so progress is underway.
Obviously, there's been a shift in culture and mentality. We know this, you just alluded to it there, but do you think, why has this also been able to exist for many years in sport as well? What many people, I guess, would also call a culture of silence.
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think, we have a lot of work to do in order to create a safe environment for everyone to come forward. It's happening. We are reaching out to athletes on a much more intentional basis than we ever have before, trying to listen to athletes, hear their concerns, identify where we can be better. So certainly that's been a significant change in how organizations have approached developing and implementing their high performance programs.
Jamie, we're hearing about abuse at the high performance level. You've been taking a look at it at the grassroots level. And I'm wondering if we take a look at all levels of sport in Canada, are we talking about an epidemic of abuse here?
No, I don't think we're talking about an epidemic. I think that for the most part, there's a lot of great things happening in Canadian sport, especially at the grassroots level. I was out at the baseball diamond this morning, full of kids on all 5 diamonds. At the rink last night, packed, lots of great stuff going on. But I think what has been lost and what is really this national reckoning, this conversation we're having around safe sport, is what I call the 99%. When you look at the Canadian sport as a big pie, a lot of the conversation right now is happening at that NSO level. We're hearing stories like Cynthia's, we're hearing stories like Allison's, we've heard from gymnastics, we've heard from a lot of different NSOs. And I think in terms of resources right now, the NSOs are starting to get some attention because there's money there with OSIC, the office that's hearing disputes. But at the grassroots level, where we found a lot of instances of criminal behavior that's not epidemic, but it persists over the years. We keep seeing these cases. And I think because of the nature of Canada's sports system, how things are funded, there's very little resources down at that local level where most of the participation is taking place, Scott, and where most of the most serious abuse over the last number of years continues to take place.
So what do we need in Canadian sport? Do we need more regulation? Do we need more oversight? What do we need?
I think really it's a question of money, as it always is. And the way our Canadian sports system has, you have the NSOs, then you have the PSOs, but when you get down to it at the local, the grassroots level, it's being run by parents like myself and like Allison, who are volunteers, who are doing A, B, C, D, and E just to get the kids on the ice, into the pool, onto the diamond. To put another thing on top of them that's a very serious subject is difficult. People only have so much bandwidth. They only have so much willingness to give of their time. So I think it's going to take some deliberate, targeted money to get some real quality training beyond the very kind of what we keep hearing, that box-ticking exercise that exists around safe sport, to really get serious about this and start talking about these more serious subjects like grooming and sexual abuse and give them the attention that they deserve.
On paper, sport is pretty simple. Go out and win, right? That's the whole goal. Get the medal, get the gold medal if you can. And I'll ask this to both Allison and Cynthia. I'll start with you, Allison. Do you think this winning at all costs culture, though, is creating an unhealthy environment in sport?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I think we need to look at it from this perspective. This Canadian sports system, as many other, have believed that we have to toughen up our athletes, that we have to use negative reinforcement coaching, we have to be tough, we have to treat them a certain way, they have to treat each other a certain way in order to win. And we have believed that by doing that, the champion will rise to the top. The argument I would challenge all of us is to shift our belief that for every Connor McDavid we created, we lost 10,000 athletes because they just weren't treated properly and were having a very poor experience. I also believe and we have seen now and proven that the higher up the high performance model you get, the more abuse you will see or potentially be vulnerable to. We have goals, we have dreams, and when I first had a therapist actually say to me, Allison, I still don't think you understand how vulnerable you were. I always equated vulnerability to weakness. And the thing with athletes is when we want something so bad, we will accept in that microenvironment treatment that we would never accept outside of sport. So the bottom line here, in my opinion, is that we need to shift our fundamental belief that when we treat our athletes and each other with kindness and respect, and we still gut it out on the field of play. We can still be assertive. There's a fine line, I will tell you, between assertive coaching and abusive coaching. And when we are there and we are assertive and we are training our athletes and they're still having a great time, we will produce way more champions. We haven't proven that yet. So that is, to me, the shift that needs to happen, that we will still win. And we have to believe in that. Every parent, every coach, every administrator, and every athlete.
I have to agree. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with wanting to win medals. It's what we're here for. I don't think any athlete goes into a sport to not try and be the best that they can. And oftentimes being the best that you can means winning medals for this country. And we want to win as many as we can. It's what's celebrated the most. I think what's lost in that journey to getting that medal is that human side and that humanistic approach to getting an athlete to that level. At some point, as an athlete enters into the sports system, they become a number. They become an object, and they lose that that person or that ideal of what it is to be a human being within the sports system. And I think it's a trickle-down effect. The coaches have a lot of pressure coming from staff and NSO, and the NSOs are also feeling pressure from their higher-ups. So the pressure kind of trickles down, and unfortunately, it manifests itself in abuse on the athletes because they're the products that we put on the field of play and to win medals for us, for Canada. What needs to happen, I agree, is that shift of finding a way to make the athlete realize that you can win without having to accept the normalized behaviors that are endemic within Canadian sport. The treatment that we allow ourselves to go under for fear of losing our spot, for fear of losing our careers. We accept things that I don't think anybody else in any society or any industry would accept. But because this is our livelihoods, as athletes, we accept things. And I think that's where we need to have that conversation, is shifting the narrative so that it's more of a holistic, humanistic approach, top to bottom.
And On the Podium was created for the purpose of winning medals and funding those athletes who you also feel could do that for the country. But how can you still win medals? How can you still have that type of goal but not leave this path of abuse behind that you're hearing about?
Well, first and foremost, sport is about developing great people. They're great athletes who we know develop into great people. Our organization's goal is to help all athletes get to the start line and know that they've had all the resources available and they have no regrets in the pursuit of their own individual performance goals. So certainly the early days of OTP focused on a shorter term horizon. Now we're looking at providing resources that are over an 8-year horizon. So that's been a very significant change. We also invest in athletes who are on the future podium pathway. We don't provide financial rewards to organizations who win medals. It's all about investing in future athletes who are on the podium pathway. I would also like to just reinforce that our organizations played a really important leadership role in trying to reinforce the importance of wellness. Now, in order for a national sport organization to even be considered for a funding recommendation, they have to have a wellness plan for athletes and every other participant that's involved in their high performance program. We're also doing work in culture assessments and providing national sport organizations with the tools and the resources to make sure that they have healthy cultures. It's not a win at all cost approach.
Allison, Anne brought up the word leadership. And I want to pose this question to you. Is there a crisis in leadership in Canadian sport? And beyond that, is it incumbent upon athletes to take a bigger role in leadership?
It's fascinating because I think it was about 5 years ago, and I was at an Athletes Can forum, and the whole forum was about how to get athletes to be reps on boards of NSOs. And I remember coming newly into that organization that Cynthia and I are proudly a part of. I was like, wait a second, why is that so hard to do? To me, if your end user of your product or the person that's actually out on the field to play is not welcome onto your board, that makes zero sense. To me, that is a unique expertise that every board in this country must crave or should crave, and that hasn't been the case. So when you say, is it a breakdown in leadership, I would say the breakdown is in all facets. Because I have met many great leaders who are trying their very best to create a positive, healthy culture. And the reality is that the whole sports system has been following, as Jamie mentioned, you'll hear me say often, this tick-the-box approach. And I will just say that we have been living in a world where we think a policy is going to prevent abuse. Policies don't prevent abuse. The policy has to come off the paper and into practice. The behaviors, the culture, what's happening in sport is what prevents abuse. There is cultural normalization of abuse and there's predatorial abuse. We need to be far more educated. And a simple, let's put a coach through a 45-minute online training module is very critical as step one. But absolutely not. We're fooling ourselves if we think that we can just put a policy in place and make someone do a 45-minute or an hour training and we are going to halt this problem. So from a leadership perspective, we need to invest and we need to know that this is never going away. That's my key message when I educate. This is a critical thing that every sport leader needs to put ahead of buying soccer balls. Because if you can't keep your participants safe, you can't have an organization.
30 seconds each. I'll come to you first, Jamie. Solutions. Where do you feel we can go from here?
I think we need to do two things. I think we need to get education and real resources that aren't box-ticking exercises to the actual kids who are participating in sports, not just the parents, not just the coaches. This is what behavior looks like that shouldn't be happening. Other thing that we need to do is we need to break down this definition of safe sport. It's come to encompass far too many things. It's concussion, it's toxic culture, it's criminal behavior. We need to compartmentalize these things and deal with them in a real way individually. It's far too much right now for people to digest.
Anne, what do you feel the solutions can be?
Well, I think we need to re-examine Canada's sports system. It's a system that is very fragmented, it's under-resourced, it lacks leadership. The issues that we're seeing in safe sport, I think, are just one symptom of a much bigger challenge. And so a review into Canada's sports system would be a significant step forward.
Cynthia?
I'm going to have to say education and funding. A lot of people are coming into these roles and not really understanding the behaviors of what grooming is and what it takes to be a great leader. But I also recognize that a lot of NSOs are under finite resources. So to ask for to NSOs and for athletes and everyone within the sport ecosystem to try and add this additional piece without the additional resources in terms of funding, it's almost asking for a wish on a star. It's really hard to really get this thing moving off the ground without the financial help. I know that NSOs are tied to finite resources and not to any fault of their own, or sometimes it is to the fault of their own in not getting additional funding, but there needs to be a cultural shift within how sport is respected within Canada, and part of that conversation does have to come down to money and funding.
Mm-hmm. And Allison?
Absolutely, and expertise. This is a new movement in sport, and there's very few experts in safe sport. And so we need to acknowledge that it's going to take time and patience. And I will always go on the record and say it has been far too slow. I've been at this for 5 years, and we should have seen way more progress by now. So again, more funding, more resources, more education. And last but certainly not least, we can't write everyone off. We cannot burn the system down. It cannot work that way. We have to have respect for coaches that have had these coaching practices ingrained in them when they were children. Hazing. You can't write off a young person because they hazed someone, because they were hazed 4 years ago. So it is very complex, and we need expertise and support to make sure people truly understand what they're dealing with.
It's an important issue for all of us. There's no question about that. I want to say thank you to our panelists, to Jamie, to Cynthia, to Allison, and to Anne in Ottawa. You know, the Minister of Sport, Pascal St-Onge, is going to be making an announcement about this on Thursday. We'll all be paying attention to that because we all want the best, Andi, for Canadian sport.
True. Love this panel because I continue to learn every time we have them, and we'll continue to have the conversations here on CBC Sports.